Welcome to the Epg Pathshala. I am Professor Ravinder Kaur, Department of Public Administration, Osmania University. Today we will be discussing about communication, and it is a part of the course Public Administration and Introduction. Communication, we will be covering various aspects such as the concept, the types of communication, process of communication, means of communication, barriers to communication, and finally the importance of communication. We all know communication is very important in our day-to-day life. In organizations also, communication is very important. No organization can function without an effective communication system. It is rightly said that communication is the bloodstream of an organization. Just as when the blood stops flowing in one part of the body, that part becomes dead. So also, if communication does not flow to any part of the organization, it becomes a dead organization. So in this aspect, communication is significant for every organization. A number of writers have mentioned about communication. To start with, when we say communication, it is a flow of information and ideas across individuals and groups. The word communication is derived from a Latin word, communis, which means to share. Thus, we can say that communication is an activity of conveying information through the exchange of thoughts, messages, which may be either spoken through gestures, written, it can be in a written form, it can be through visuals, or it can also be through behavior. Friends, I would like to give a few definitions given by various authors. For example, J.D. Millett, he defines communication as the shared understanding of a shared purpose. Peter Drucker, he says, the most important thing in communication is hearing what is not said. Another important writer, Audwey Ted, he says communication is the process whereby one person makes ideas and feelings known to another person. The idea of communication is a meeting of minds on common issues. An analysis of these definitions will show that for communication, we require two people. One is the sender, second is the receiver, and you also have in between the messages. So there is a sender, a receiver, and messages are very important. If either of it is absent, communication may not be possible at all. So communication, we can say, is very important in any organization for its effective functioning. Different types of communication have been mentioned. First, we say is the oral and written communication. Then you have formal and informal communication, downward and upward communication, horizontal and diagonal communication. These are the different types of communications. Friends, let us discuss a little briefly about these different types of communications. Coming to oral communication. Oral communication, it refers to the messages that are received in a verbal form. So verbally, there is a face-to-face communication between two individuals. So one aspect of oral communication is verbal or face-to-face communication. It can also be a telephonic communication between two people. There may be interviews. So, in the oral communication, we have people talking to each other. Nothing is in a written form. That is one aspect or one type of communication. The second important one is written communication. Written communication is always in the form of writing messages and conveying it to the people. So, in the written communication, some of the examples we can say are newspaper bulletins. They may be in the form of letters, memos, reports, forms, manuals, etc. All these are examples of written communication. And in most of the organizations, we have this the written communications taking an important place. Coming to the third important aspect of communication in the same category, you have gestural communications. Communication through gestures or postures is called as gestural communication. It is often used to supplement oral communication. Most of the time, we find people giving gestures. Gestures can express the emotions of the individuals. It expresses the behavior of the individuals. And in oral communication, we have the gestural communication playing a very important role, because what is not said can be conveyed through gestures. So, gestural communication is also very important. The second type of communication, friends, was the formal and informal communication. In organizations, we have the formal communication, which refers to communication between the official and his subordinates. Or it can also, we can also say that it is between the one level of organization to another level of organization. The formal communication, it is very important in the operation of an organization. Coming to the informal communication, which is also called as grapevine. This type of communication takes place informally through interpersonal contacts amongst the employees, independently outside the official line of communication. So, if formal communication is in the it is between the superior and the subordinates, or it is within the organization, informal communication may be outside the organization also. Informal communication takes place when people are meeting, say during the lunchtime. That is very important because it helps in building interpersonal relations amongst the individuals within the organization. Coming to the third type of communication, we can say it is downward, upward and diagonal. The downward communication is, it flows from people at the higher levels to the subordinates at the lower levels. Downward communication is more directive in nature. It is in the form of giving orders to the subordinates, giving them instructions from time to time. Coming to the upward communication, it is the flow of information from the subordinates to the higher levels. It may be in the form of, say, the progress of work that has been done. We all know when the superior officer gives instructions to his subordinates to do a work, it becomes the responsibility of the subordinate to inform his superior with regard to the progress of the work, or he can also inform with regard to the problems that he is facing pertaining to the work itself. Upward communication may also be in the form of grievances that the subordinates may have, or if they want to share their ideas with the superior officers, they can also communicate with the superior officers. So upward communication may be in the form of opinions, grievances, and also suggestions, because suggestions are very important. If the organization has to function effectively, there should be a proper communication system, and both the superiors and the subordinates have to interact with each other from time to time. Coming to the next type of communication is the diagonal communication. Diagonal communication is between, say, here we say that the communication cuts across the different levels in the organization. It cuts across the organizational structures, and it facilitates the transmission of messages between different levels in the organization. Now, having discussed the different types of communication, friends, let us go on to the other important aspect, that is the process of communication. The simple process of communication would be where you have the sender, you have the message, and the receiver. In the introduction itself, I've mentioned about the sender, receiver, and the message. Now, in the process also, we can say that we have one sender who sends the messages and another who receives the messages. But to still go deeper into this process of communication, we would say that there are two important players. One is the sender, the second is the receiver. Before the communication is sent, the sender has to think. The thought process begins, and with that, we call it as ideation. Ideas are only raw, they are in the minds of the individual. Then he has to encode it. So ideation will be the first step, encoding will be the second step. This is with regard to the sender. Once he has encoded it, encoding here would be in a written form, would be either through symbols, or it can also be through numericals. In defense organizations, for example, we can say that the communication is sent in a different manner. It can be using numericals, it can be using alphabets, or it can be in a written form. So, sender is one important person. Ideation, ideas take place in his mind. Encoding is done. After he has put it on paper, then comes the transmission. How is he going to send the communication? Whether it is verbal, whether it is in a written form. So the mode of transmission He can also convey it telephonically, he can send it by speed post, or he can send it through email, which is the most important mode of communication. Once he has sent it, the receiver's job, receiver has to receive the communication. Now, when he receives the communication, he has to understand what the sender wanted to convey to him. So, for that, decoding is necessary. So, response of the receiver is to decode the communication. Later on that basis, he will have to act. So, action is another important aspect. Now, after decoding, he acts, or if he finds any problem, again he has to, the process we will say ideation, encoding, transmission, and he has to give a feedback to the sender. So, communication is a continuous process within the organization. So, it begins with the sender. Transmission is the second important aspect. You have the receiver again trying to convey his ideas, opinions, and transmit it to the sender. So, in this way, it becomes a vicious circle. The next important aspect, now in the process of communication is complete. The next important aspect would be communication network. A communication network is a pattern of interconnected lines through which messages might flow in one direction or in several directions. As a pattern of contacts among the organizations, communication network contains several channels. These channels determine the rapidity, the accuracy, and the smoothness with which the messages flow in and outside the organization. There are two types of communication networks again. One is formal and second is informal. The formal communication network may be in a circular form, it may be a chain network, or it can be a wheel or star network. The circle network represents three-level hierarchy in which communication is between the superiors, the subordinates, and it can also be cross communication at the operative level. The second type is the chain network. Under this network, the message flows in a direct vertical line, that is, it is in a scalar form, or we say the scalar chain of authority. All the subordinates receive the orders or receive communication from the top level in the hierarchy. So, this chain of command is another important aspect of communication network. The third type is the wheel or star network. In this, we have one center point of communication, and communication flows to different parts of the organization, or we can say communication flows from the central point to different subordinates in the organization. The next type of communication is the Y type of communication. In the Y type of communication, we have two subordinates who are reporting to a superior officer. This type of network is less centralized when compared to the wheel or the star network. And the last one is all channels network. Now, in all channels network, you have a group of people actively communicating with each other. It is the most decentralized type of formal communication network. Coming to the next type of communication network, it is the informal communication network. Keith Davis, an important writer, he has highlighted the phenomenon of grapevine in an organization. Grapevine here, already I have mentioned, it is the informal contacts or the informal relationships within the organization. Now in this, the first thing he mentions is the single strand network. Now under this, the information passes from one to one, that is, one member communicates to another member who in turn communicates to another, and so on. So this is direct one-to-one communication. The second type of informal communication network is the gossip network. Now under this network, a member having information passes on to everyone he meets. So this is gossip network. The third one is probability network. Here, information passes according to the law of probability. That is, one member communicates with others who in turn communicate with some other persons. The last one is the cluster network, and in the cluster network you have the information passes selectively. That is, the member will give information to only those persons whom he trusts. So that is why it is called as the cluster network. The networking is deliberately cultivating contact amongst individuals in the organization. Networking can also be between one organization and other organizations. So it can take many forms. Networking can take many forms. For example, establishing contacts with people in formal structures, or it can be establishing contacts with people in social gatherings. So that form of networking can also be there. Then in the same category of forms of networking, we have the relationship building behavior. The relationship building behavior, it is generally within organizations such as service clubs or religious groups, wherein the members are bound together by way of rituals, or there may be some fellowship or some creative systems wherein there is a reciprocal preference for professional opportunities. The next one you have is relationship building at social occasions. Now, social occasions may be luncheons, it may be dinner parties, or it may be, whenever people are meeting. It can be a golf match, it can be a cricket match. Whenever they are meeting, they are interacting with each other, and this is mainly leading to professional payoffs. So we have the relationship building type of communication also. The last one under this category would be loose coalition of organization representatives who meet who frequently meet with each other. They exchange information, they work towards unofficial and sometimes official cooperation also. So this is with regard to the forms of networking. Let us discuss about the other important aspects, that is the means of communication. How are we going to communicate with each other? First is the personal contacts. Now, personal contacts in an organization are maintained through personal messengers, through telephones, mobile phones, SMSs, fax system. You have alternate mechanical aids in telecommunications which have widened the scope of personal contacts amongst individuals, both within the organization as well as outside the organization. The second form of means of communication is the formal correspondence. The formal correspondence is maintained through a system of files. As students of administration, we know that files are very important in an organization. Every work that is done, it has to originate in a file form, and it has to move from one level, mostly from the lower levels to the top level in the organization. So, files are an important means of formal correspondence. Then you have memoranda, you have minutes of the meetings. These devices facilitate the exchange of views on knowledge as well as the whatever matter is available with you on hand. So, we can say that in organizations, the correspondence is very important means of communication. It is not only within the organization, but correspondence has to be between the organization and its clients, the organization and the people who are in contact with the organization for getting the work done. The other important means of communication is forms. Now, forms, we all know, official forms. Forms provide us the data with regard to the information about the clients, information about the administrators. Now, as students, you all know that when you have taken admissions, you are submitting forms. That forms, that it gives the personal details which have to be maintained within the university system. In offices, forms are necessary. Forms contain the important information both about the clients as well as the members of the organization. So, through forms, you can also ensure uniformity in the treatment of the clients. We can also ensure that the data is secure within the organization. The next means of communication is a report. Report is very essential. When the superior officer gives directions to his subordinates to complete a task, it becomes the responsibility of the subordinate to submit a report on the work that has been done, or he may also have to give from time to time the progress of the work. So, the progress of the work, the completion of the task may be in the form of a report. Report should always be brief. It should also avoid unnecessary details. The next means of communication is manuals. Manuals are very important as they give the guidelines and directions to the employees within the organization. It is through the manuals that the employees can understand the work of the organization, and it also ensures the progress within the organization. Staff meetings have to be held frequently within the organization. Staff meeting will ensure contacts between the superior officers and the subordinates. It is nothing but the flow of information and exchange of information between different levels in the organization. Not only that, we can say that staff meeting helps in building up the morale and also bringing about coordination within the organization. Today's world is an era of information and communication technology. So we can say that the technology has played a very important role in increasing the quality and quantity of communication in a workplace. A number of developments that have taken place in this area of technology is the email. Email, we all know, where we are using the internet to send messages and to receive computer generated test documents. It is considered to be the most fastest and the cheapest means of communication. Through the email, communication can be sent simultaneously to a number of people at the click of a mouse. Instant messaging is another important revolution in the area of communication and technology. Instant messaging allows people who are online to share messages with one another instantaneously without having to go through email system. The third important technology usage is social networking. Social networking, or we say SNS, is a phrase used to describe any website that enables users to create public profiles within that website and form relationships with other users at the same website. Weblogs or blogs, it is a discussion or communication site published on World Wide Web. It consists of discrete entries or posts typically displayed in reverse chronological order. The next important innovation is the PowerPoint presentation, which contains number of individual papers or slides with the help of a slide projector. The presentations can be printed, displayed live on a computer through the command of a presenter. Lastly, you have the video conferencing. Video conferencing allows two or more locations to communicate by a simultaneous two-way video and audio transmission. It is also called as the visual collaboration. Video conferences, we all know, have become very common today. Most of the state chief ministers are using the video conferencing method. It helps in getting information from the district collectors. Whenever the chief minister is holding a conference with the district collectors, he calls for information and then asks them as to what future measures have to be taken. So video conferencing saves the time and energy of both. At the same time, it is also cost effective. So we can say that the technology has brought communication closer to each other. The next important aspect, friends, that we would like to discuss is on the essentials of communication. Now, if communication has to be effective, what are the requirements? What are the essential aspects that have to be taken care of? First thing is clarity. Communications must be clearly and precisely stated. So clarity is very important. Clarity depends not only on simplicity of language but also on the expression of reason for the decision. If the communication is clear, it becomes easier for the receiver to understand the communication. The second important aspect is consistency. Communication should be consistent with the expectations of the recipient. Thirdly, it should be adequate. When we say adequacy, it should neither be too less or too much. It should be able to stimulate the desired response of the receiver. So, we can say that the sender should send communication which is adequate enough to evoke response from the receiver. The receiver should not be overburdened. Timeliness is another important aspect. Communication should be sent on time. It should neither be sent too early or too late. Many times, friends, you know that if communication is sent too early, we may forget. We may not take up the task. If it is sent too late, we are unable to complete the task. So, timeliness is very important for sending of the communication. The next important essential requirement is uniformity. Communication should be uniform for all those who are expected to behave in the same way. No discrimination in the amount or nature of communication should be there, because if there is discrimination, it causes a lot of heartburning, or it may cause jealousy amongst the people in the organizations. In our day-to-day lives also, we see that if we are not communicating properly with individuals, if we are not sending a uniform if there is no uniformity in the communication system, then it will lead to heartburning. Sometimes people stop talking to each other because they feel that one person was given one type of information, the other person has been given a little lesser information. Flexibility. When we say uniformity may bring in rigidity. So, communication to be effective, it is necessary that it should be flexible, because in public administration, we know that it involves human beings on both the sides of communication, the sender and the receiver. The local conditions may require variations in administration. So that is why some amount of flexibility is important in communication. Acceptability is another important essential aspect of communication. Good communication is one which is readily relied upon and accepted. Use of informal organization is also another important essential requirement of communication. Sometimes what happens, we have information flowing from the top to the bottom, from the superior to the subordinate. Sometimes this channel is inadequate, and to fill the gaps, we require an informal organization, because as students of administration we know that informal organizations exist within the formal organizations. So that way informal contacts, informal relationships are very important. Peter Drucker has rightly mentioned about the importance of communication. He states bluntly that poor communications are the direct result of our ignorance. He is very blunt, which shows that communication is important. So now we move on to the importance of communication. Over the years, authors like Chester Bernard viewed communication as a means by which people are linked together within the organization. Now they are linked together within the organization to achieve a purpose, and it can be judged from the following points. The importance of communication can be judged from the following points. First of all, communication is necessary to achieve the goals of the organization. So if there is a proper communication system established within the organization, it becomes easier to achieve the goals of the organization. It may also help in the effective functioning of the organization. In the introductory part also, I have mentioned that the successful functioning of the organization totally depends upon the effective communication system. Communication helps the administration in arriving at vital decisions. Communication helps in planning and coordination. We can say that communication is an important tool for supervision also. At the same time, communication is also considered as a basic tool for motivation, and it helps in increasing the morale of the employees. To sum up the importance of communication, we can say that communication helps in achieving the goals of the organization. It helps in achieving good relationship between the superior and the subordinates, and at the same time it also helps in strengthening the contacts between the different levels of individuals within the organization by way of informal relationships. There are a number of barriers to communication. We have discussed about the types of communication, the essentials of communication, the means of communication. Now let us discuss about the barriers to communication. There are a number of barriers to communication. First is the semantic barriers to communication. Semantic barriers refers to the barriers caused due to the failure in understanding the language of the communicator. Suppose if you are using jargons or if you are using words with double meaning, it becomes difficult for the receiver to understand the communication. So faulty translations may also be one of the aspects of the semantic barriers. If the messages are not clear, or if technical jargons fall under this particular category of semantic barriers. The second barrier is the psychological barriers. The psychological barrier refers to the recipient's inability to understand the communication. It depends upon his psychological status. Now suppose if there is a verbal communication between two people and the receiver's mind is elsewhere, he is something else, he is thinking something else, he is not able to receive the correct information, and that can become one of the psychological barriers because his mind is somewhere else. His mental, or we can say that because he may be bodily present but mentally absent. Similarly, we can say the person who is sending the message also, he should not be careless while he is sending the message. And the psychological barrier, another important aspect of that would be the lack of mutual trust between the sender and the receiver. The third important barrier to communication is the ideological barrier. Now, ideas, according to Fifner, ideological barriers include misunderstandings arising out of the differences in background, education, and differences in the social and political views of the individual. Sometimes one person may have strong ideas about a particular aspect. The other person does not agree with these ideas, so he will not accept the communication at all. So ideological barriers may also be there. Rigid rules and regulations is another important barrier to communication. If communication is sent through prescribed rules and regulations, then it will lead to delay. In public administration, most of the time, whenever there is a delay in communication, we say that, okay, it is because of the hierarchy, or it is because of the delay on the part of the superior officer in sending the communication. The status relationship is another important barrier to communication. Whenever the person is at a higher level in the organization, he considers himself to be above everyone. That superior status is there, and this becomes an important barrier. See, most of the time we experience when people are at top positions, they do not interact freely with the lower levels in the organization because they are status conscious. They feel that it is because of their status they should not mingle freely with their subordinates. An attitudinal barrier is another important barrier. Some of the people have a conservative attitude. Now, in the organizations also, the superiors may have a conservative attitude whereby they withhold the information. They do not want to pass on the entire information to the subordinates. And the next barrier to communication is the complexity of the organizational structure. In this barrier of communication, that is the complexity of organization structure, the larger the organization, the greater is the difficulty in communication process. Amongst the barriers, the resistance to change, this is the last barrier to communication. Human beings by nature want to maintain their status quo. So, hence, initial opposition is observed towards new developments in organization functions. There is a saying, old habits die hard. This is also so. Whenever a change is to be brought about, in the organization, there may be a resistance to change. And when there is a resistance to change, they don't want to accept the communication very easily. Summing up our discussion on communication, we can say that good communication is the foundation for sound administration. This quotation has been given by Peter Drucker. He rightly states that good communication is the foundation for sound administration. Communication is a necessity to an organization as the bloodstream is to a person. Effectiveness of an organization largely depends upon the effectiveness of communication. If the network of communication is poor, then automatically the organization gets affected, and vice versa. See, we don't say that it is the communication itself which is faulty. Sometimes the organizational procedures also, if not communicated properly, they will lead to a number of barriers. So, in order to make communication effective, Millet suggests that communication should be clear, it should be consistent, it should be adequate, it should be timely and uniform. Lastly, it should be acceptable by the recipient also. Terry has recommended 8 practices of achieving this particular goal. Firstly, he says, inform yourself fully. The sender who is sending the communication, he should be fully informed as to what he wants to communicate. And then the second point that he suggests is trust each other. When we say trust each other, both the sender and the receiver should be able to trust each other. There should be a common ground of experience on the part of both the sender and the receiver. And in order to make the communication more effective, we should say those words which are known to each other, mutually known to each other, should be used while sending the information. Contextuality is another important aspect. The communication should be sent especially with regard to a particular context. When you are sending the communication or when you are contacting the individual, when there is a face-to-face contact, you should be able to hold the attention of the receiver. If the communication is to be properly understood, you should be able to hold the attention of the receiver. While communicating, if you are using visual texts or visual aids, it will be able to hold the attention of the receiver. So, these are the different aspects which Millet has suggested with regard to effective communication. Friends, today we have discussed about communication. We have discussed about the meaning, the different definitions given by various authors, and the types of communication, the means of communication, the significance of communication, and lastly, how communication can be made more and more effective. I would only say that communication is very important. Without communication, it becomes difficult for us to live in the society. So friends, I hope you have understood this module on communication. For further reading and clarifications, you can refer to the e-text. You also have a number of books. If you have adequate time, you can go to the libraries, or you have lot of information available on the internet also. Thank you.